My name is Marine Hugonnier. I was born in France, 1969. I make films and photographs, and I live in London. I guess since I've been living in London, I've been interested in the idea of landscape, and every single work in this show is related to this idea. Mainly the work is focusing through different mediums, which is films and photographs, and also there's one piece which is really a sculpture piece. Onto the idea of how does a landscape changes social conditions? How does what's the relationship between history and geography? How does one influence the other? It also questions images in a broader sense, meaning I'm trying to understand their sense in our culture. I don't pick up subjects because they have to have some kind of political implication. The thing is, I grew up with parents who were politically aware and who made us aware very early on. It was vital to have some kind of political commitment. They met in 1968 in May on the barricades in Paris, and we grew up with a stream of utopia running through the house, I suppose. So I guess even if unconsciously I pick up places where things could have happened and politically they were important, I'm not really aware of it, but it all unfolds like that. But it's true that it's part of my makeup. The other question that it leads to would be to think, is it important, do you think that art has to do with politics? How do you have to have a political position as an artist? I would say probably yes, and I would say that it would be a very idealistic answer to say yes. But I have the feeling that art should operate within reality, create something in reality that sort of transcends the work, and raise questions, or at least put issue into a crisis, to be really, for me, a work of art. Being only aesthetic doesn't do it for me. So it might be a very idealistic answer to say, yes, I think it's important that it has a political implication. But again, I'm not so conscious that I'm doing that, because I've just grew up with that. So I just walk along with it, I would say. I think I try to deny the power of images really more than anything else. I use these traditional, these very academic, I would say, means of works of arts. I mean, landscape and seascapes and all that. But I try to twist it around. I grew up in Morocco at one point in my life, and I was quite young, and I remember having at my eyesight mosaics, which are always on the bottom of the walls. And I had a very particular relationship to these abstract patterns, which to me, and which to all Muslim countries, is a way, abstraction is a way to relate to the absolute. So you don't need images in between you and what transcends you, what is part of you, depending how you look at it. So I think the possibility to deny images is also the possibility to recreate a world full of fantasy, which I feel living in the Occidental world doesn't allow me to do this. So there are lots of images in the work, but I'm not sure that they're standing still, meaning that this is the only thing you're looking at. When you're looking at Alaska, the pictures I did in Alaska, you're actually looking at something that can't be grabbed in a picture, which is the future, because photography always shows something in the past, usually. So it's sort of slip between your hands, these pictures. They're kind of pointless and useless. Going to Afghanistan, I can't shoot this panorama view. So again, it's about this failure of being able to represent something. It's the same with the flowers, which the flowers is also a pattern of abstraction for a Muslim country. To make this perfect image will never be perfect. So I think fundamentally I try to, I guess the piece which is the closest to me and which is the oldest also in the show is Leader, which I've been working on for years, and it's just a simple black picture. I had read in the daily paper, French daily paper called Le Monde, that the Panjshir Valley had been described as a paradise garden in ancient Persian poetry. And I also knew that it was within this valley that the movement of the Northern Aliens was born with Shah Massoud. So I just had these two ideas in my mind, and I went. I didn't know what I was doing. But it turned out to be fine, although there was no tourist and it was a bit scary. But I really didn't have. I only had these two ideas in my mind. How does this landscape made that resistance movement possible? I also knew that they found anything they needed to survive within the valley for 25 years, which is amazing. And they never had to be fed by anything else. I mean, they would buy guns with emeralds from outside the valley, but otherwise they had anything they needed to survive with. So I was really intrigued of how landscape could create that particular history, and particularly mountains. But it's only later, about 4 or 5 months after I came back, that I sort of realized what I could do with the footage, how I shot it, what kind of lens I used, and started to think about and finding the space to be really honest with what happened. Is that there were few places we wanted to go, and the one that was really important was the strategic point of view, this panorama. So I started to think, well, actually, it may be quite interesting to tell the truth. I haven't been able to do this, and why, and what does that mean? And so that's how the film came about, but it took a long time. When I left from England to Kabul, I guess the only two people who thought or believed that I knew what I was doing was my dealer and my director of photography. I had no idea. I get to meet more and more people who are just fed up of looking at things on televisions and news and just take a bag and go and see for themselves. And a lot of people feel quite useless politically, so they just maybe want to go and see and have their own opinion about it and maybe give a hand if they could be useful. I've always been mountain walking, and the Matterhorn is somehow you find the Matterhorn in this image of the Paramount. You also find, I mean, it's not exactly the Matterhorn, but it's a very similar image. The Matterhorn is also described by John Ruskin as a perfect piece of art in nature. So I was intrigued by the Matterhorn itself, and I had traveled around America for a while and went through national parks and realized that there was more and more restriction on the way we were looking at nature, and nature was turning itself into, and we were turning nature into a commodity. And we simply didn't have the possibility to walk through nature and wander through nature as we wanted. The Grand Canyon, for example, is amazing. You have a series of points of view they have to follow to be able to look at it. Now, the last tour is it's like a little science fiction movie where I try to foresee the possibility of some of these places, in order to be preserved, they would have to be closed at one point. And how would the idea of having suddenly a completely blank space on the map, which recalls the time of discovery, how would this affect us? But again, I mean, maybe it's only my pure fantasy of just having a space where you can't do images. But yeah, how would it affect us to not have access to these places now that everything is so accessible and everything is about making choice? How actually restriction upon something like that could stimulate imaginary, could just bring up new issues about nature, really, in a completely opposite way. So that's what the film is about. And we flew balloon ride. Right? We flew an air balloon, over the Matterhorn, which was quite nice. And but it's kind of like to remind us of Jules Verne, Around the Day in 80 Worlds, and also the first tour of Thomas Cook. So in fact, the balloon ride is presented as the last tour, and I've actually made a prop for the film, which was this kind of leaflet, like an advertising, like if Thomas Cook would advertise the last tour before the park would get to be closed. But also, I think the last tour recalls an idea that has been running through the 20th century, which is this fear, this fantasy about being the last one. I think we sort of entertain the idea that when you go someplace, whether it's in Greece or wherever you want to go, you're somehow the first one. Like the pictures you get to see in tourist catalogues are always empty beaches, pure sand, beautiful sun. So we entertain this idea that you might be the first there. But in fact, I think that since the Second World War, what's running through things much more as a fear is being afraid of being the last one. And it's somehow contradictory in a way. And I think it's... the last tour is part of a trilogy with Ariana, but it also sort of jumps to another film I made before called Anna Hanusova. And there will be a third film.